Animal experimentation is a subject which provokes passionate arguments between defenders of animal rights and those who consider laboratory animals as a necessary evil for the advance of science. It's a subject which touches the general public. Animal lovers, people that share their lives with animals, find animal experimentation traumatic.
The principal objective of animal experimentation, at least in the public mind, is biomedical research, and therefore everything which involves sickness and death. And so there is a kind of self-projection into sickness and into death, which leads to rejection of this practice. The other aspect, doubtless, is the fact that there is a kind of contradictory association between one of the most noble and specifically human ideas, that is the advancement of knowledge, and the fact that in the framework of that advance, an animal will be made to suffer. There is a hierarchy of emotional values for animals used in laboratories. We can see that the public is quite insensitive to rodents, quite indifferent to the pig, which is an extremely affectionate animal, and that the public is devastated by the use of dogs, cats, or primates. In reality, interest for animals is driven by an anthropocentric vision, which means that it is centered on mankind. Humans have a tendency to only be interested in animals which are close to us or which resemble us, in such a way that the ethical attention of man to animals is established in concentric circles, a kind of downwards gradient, which means that the further away an animal is from us in its shape, its behavior, the less interested in it we are. So, close to us we find obviously household pets, dogs, cats, and next comes horses or the great apes, then farmyard animals, and then birds, next reptiles, followed by fish, and after that, well, then there's the vast, immense population, which is around 95% of the living world, the invertebrates, the insects, which nobody really cares much for, except for specialists.
Animal experimentation is a social question which forces us to reflect on our relationship with other living creatures and on the hierarchy of the living world which we establish. For centuries, the animal world and humanity have been kept carefully separate. Human beings were far and away the most intelligent and sensitive creatures, and refused any possibility that the beasts could have intelligence, sensitivity, or emotions. However, through their experiments, scientists are proving little by little that the frontier between the two worlds is not as uncrossable as was thought. Just like us, animals learn, memorize, imitate, communicate, feel, and dream. From this point on, our attitude to animals and the way in which we treat them can only change. Discussion about the possibility of replacing, reducing, and rationalizing the use of laboratory animals was begun at the end of the 1950s. This was the theory of the 3 R's, developed by 2 English researchers, William Russell and Rex Birch, who formalized their ideas on animal experimentation, working from dual ethical and scientific points of view. They urged the scientific community to replace animal experimentation by using other methods, to reduce the number of animals used, and to rationalize experimental protocols to limit the suffering inflicted upon animals. The question of suffering is central as, for public opinion, animal experimentation is above all another way of saying trauma and pain. Even if attention was mostly centered on mammals, the ethical question of suffering exists for all living creatures, even for those that mankind considers to be less evolved.
After having demonstrated that some invertebrate animals could feel pain, we managed to get the new European directive to take cephalopods into consideration, for the European community to recognize them as sensitive beings and which are now protected like vertebrates are.
Comme les vertébrés.
Anesthesia is the most common method of limiting the suffering of animals during experiments.
I'm quite shocked by the reactions to this subject that can be heard about scientists who are sometimes accused of being sadists, heartless people who torture animals. No, it's untrue, for one simple reason, and that is that a mistreated animal endangers the validity of the experiment, if only for that. But there are other reasons. Researchers are attentive to the well-being of the animal. Furthermore, they do all they can, everything that is possible, so that the animal is damaged as little as possible during the experiment they make upon it.
Despite the adoption of the 3 R's rule by the scientific community, science still uses a lot of animals. 12 million a year for the 27 countries of the European Union, of which more than 80% are rodents. However, the reliability of animal experimentation can be questioned. Are results of tests on animals capable of being applied to man? In order to limit the risks of error in such extrapolation, some research is trying to rely rather on direct observation of human subject. This is the main aim of a new study in respiratory toxicology being developed by Professor Gretschurters.
By our research on exhale breath, we do observations in humans to see what happens in the airways. And we especially focus on children because they are a vulnerable population and they suffer from respiratory diseases. 1 out of 3 has asthma or allergies. And by looking at the exhale breath, we try to see what happens in the airways. Once when we have the breath samples of the children, we analyze them and we get a spectrum where you can see the different molecules which are present, and we can identify which chemicals are present here.
It's on the chemical molecules identified in the breath of children that Professor Gretschurters will concentrate her research upon by developing a very specific method.
Well, we culture airway cells which come from human airways, and we culture them and then we expose them to chemicals which are present in the environment. And we can see which effects the chemicals have on these cells. And this we can compare with what you observe in the children. With this equipment, we simulate exposure of the human lungs to air with chemicals. And what we do is we put the cells in these little wells, and they get air with chemicals on top of it. And underneath there is some liquid, and that simulates the body fluid. For respiratory toxicology, it's especially important to work on human cells because there is no good animal model available. The metabolism in an animal is different from in humans for many chemicals. And also animals don't live that long. So while humans can be exposed for many years to a chemical, it's very difficult to simulate that by animal tests. So that complicates the extrapolation from animals to humans.
Today, certain cell culture techniques allow the complete replacement of animal testing. In total, 30 or so alternative methods are used in Europe, of which 2/3 concern cosmetics. The search for alternative methods of testing cosmetic products has also been stimulated by more restrictive legislation. Animal testing was banned in 2004 for finished products. Since 2009, legislation applies to all the ingredients used in their composition.